Hi, I'm Fred Weems. Today is April 4th, 2020. I'm using a different camera. My Nikon broke the other day. I accidentally dropped it on the ground, leaving my car, and it got sand in its gears. Anyway, you may hear an ee sound. This old Kodak EasyShare seems to make that sound happen when I do a video. Anyway, here's a piece that I just wrote. It's called The Moral of the Story. I can't say I don't hate the title. I always disliked the little line below the bottom of any given fable in Aesop's fables. Moral: the fox smells his own scent first. Moral: slow and steady wins the race. I'd have said feh if I'd known as a child what feh meant. I barely know what it means now, but I know there are few better ways of rejecting the smug little commentaries at the end of anything Aesop wrote or spoke out loud, because I'm sure he was purer than the written, or at that time chiseled, word, than saying loud and clear, feh. I'm going to call this The Wasp Who Said Feh. I had a slip-cased edition of Aesop as a kid. My grandmother gave it to me. It had a purple slipcase, purple like the burgundy everyone drank at the dining room table on a Sunday when my mother cooked leg of lamb. He who laughs last laughs best, she might say, as someone passed a plate for a second dollop of mint jelly. Don't be afraid to eat the gristle, Fred, Mom would say. I always used to cut the fat off and would almost gag at the gamey taste of the lamb. This is delicious, Joy, a nice adult would say. Then it was time for Yorkshire pudding. It was a sort of omelet with a lard-soaked crust. This Yorkshire pudding is scrumptious, another nice adult would say. I would accidentally knock over a glass of milk. God damn it to hell, Fred, my mother would shout. Someone would take one of the massive cloth napkins and throw it over the pool of milk. My mother would right the glass, sometimes knocking it the other way. It would clink against the plate. Damn it, my mother would say. Don't cry over spilt milk, someone would say. Mom would go into the kitchen and come back with more milk. She poured in the glass. Frank, turn the record over, my father would say. My brother Frank would get over and take the needle off the rejecting groove it had been skating in for the last few minutes. Something's wrong there with that sentence. He'd flip over the record. Vivaldi would begin again. Is that Rum Powell? A guest would say. Oh, Jesus, Bob, my mother would say, Bob having spilt his glass of milk. Anyway, Aesop would have summed it up, and I say no to Aesop. My edition of Aesop was, I'm guessing, a Grosset and Dunlap edition. It had the iron-looking typesetting of the mid-century prestige artifact. The illustrations were formed of sturdy lines. Each fable had two black-and-white drawings, one below the title but above the text, showing the action in silhouette, and the other came after the text and was always Aesop, pointing upward yet accusingly, a faintly startled look in his eyes. He had a toga and a cane made of some sort of twisted branch. I despised this bald, humble, wise being. There were plates, color illustrations by the same joy-bereft artist, on pages thicker than the regular pages, scattered through the book. And how far are you in the Aesop book? My grandmother asked me once. I think it was Easter. I've read a few. And how do you like them? I don't get them. I thought you liked Aesop, my mother lied. Well, she probably was not lying, but I'm sure she herself never much liked the bastard. I like the fact that Gaga gave me Aesop's fables, I said. Maybe I'm too young. My grandmother smiled. You like funny stories better. So do I. Gaga had given me several Charles M. Schulz collections. They were the Holt Rinehart Winston editions, with the pages sewn at the binding, not glued, like the Signet reprints. I disdained the Signet reprints, which contained only half the panels in the Holt Rinehart Winston editions and had smudged pages like newspapers. Holt Rinehart and Winston used thick paper that lasted. Gaga once got me to write to Charles M. Schulz, care of Holt Rinehart and Winston. I was in the 2nd grade, with the flu. In the letter, I asked Charles M. Schulz how Lucy and Linus were. I mentioned I had the flu. I got a letter back. Its author told me Lucy had the flu but was getting better, and that she and her brother hoped I would be feeling better soon. There were little drawings of the Peanuts gang below the text, much nicer than the angular, charmless Aesop at the bottom of every fable, just below the moral. I remember thinking it was weird there'd been no stamp on the envelope. A year or so later, when two of the kids next door were at our house watching me color in my Charlie Brown coloring books, one of them asked if he could look at one of the coloring books. He proceeded to draw Charlie Brown on the blank side of the front cover. "That's really good," I said. "I know," said Paul. He was 3 years older than I was. His sister drew in the other book. She drew Violet. "You draw Charlie Brown almost as well as Charles M. Schulz," I said to Paul. "I draw Charlie Brown better than Charles M. Schulz," he said. "That's impossible," I said. "You can draw Charlie Brown as well as Charles M. Schulz, but Charles M. Schulz invented Charlie Brown. You can't draw him better than Charles M. Schulz." "Yes, I can," said Paul. Linus, too. He'd drawn Linus on the blank side of the back cover. "I draw Charlie Brown and Linus better than Charles M. Schulz." Jean, 2 years older than Paul, held up Violet. "It's Violet!" I exclaimed. It had been Jean, about a year and a half before, who told me I should write to my hero, Astro Boy. "But he's a cartoon character," I said. "I know where he lives," said Jean. I was in first grade. "In space," I said. "If you write to Astro Boy, he'll answer," Jean said. I got out a piece of paper and a blue crayon. Blue was my favorite color, ever since I decided red was for sissies. I wrote it that night and asked my mother for an envelope. "He's a cartoon character," my mother said. "Jean says I'll get an answer. She says if I put it in the mailbox and put the little red thing up, he'll get the letter." I walked to the end of the driveway to the mailbox, put the envelope in, and tried to raise the flag. I went back in. I got my mother to come out and got my mother to help. Weird sentence there. 2 days later, Jean came up to me. "Run to the mailbox, Fred," she said. Astro Boy might have answered. "But he didn't answer yesterday," I said. "I have a feeling he saw the flag and answered. He has to look from space." I ran to the mailbox. There was a long envelope which looked mangled. "There's some thing in it," I said. "Look how mangled it is," said Jean. "He had to bring that from outer space." I tore open the envelope, which had my name in giant chalk letters, as if they'd been written with a lightning bolt. "There's just this," I said. I took out a corroded bolt. "I think it's a spark plug," Jean said. "But why didn't he put a letter in the envelope?" I said. "Well, Astro Boy can't read," Jean said. I was thrilled. "It's from space," I said. So a year later, sick with the flu, or something my older brother, who'd been sick at the same time, told me well into our adult life was probably something much more serious, it causing us earaches and vomiting as we watched reruns of the Beverly Hillbillies and Bewitched for 2 weeks straight, I wrote to Charles M. Schulz at my grandmother's suggestion. Why was she visiting? My brother and I were quite sick, is the answer. Everything I've read about him indicates to me he would have answered the way the letter was answered. But even at 8 years old, the lack of a stamp seemed weird to me, California return address notwithstanding. Sometime when I was about 9, I was talking to Jean about the brilliance of the Bugs Bunny cartoon I'd just been watching. Jean and her brother were great fans of Warner Brothers cartoons. They'd watch them sometimes at our house. They'd cheer when they saw the name Chuck Jones. Their uncle was one of the cartoonists who drew Bazooka Joe. "You know," said Jean, "I bet the studio would send you an original drawing of Bugs Bunny if you asked for one." She knew I'd gotten a letter from Dr. Seuss's staff when I'd written to him. I wish I still had that letter. It said, "Dr. Seuss is on vacation." While it informed me he could not, therefore, answer the letter personally, it featured one of the fantastic creatures only he could create. I actually threw it away. It was a form letter. I don't know if Jean knew how mad that form letter had made me. "Bugs himself might answer," Jean was saying. "Now, you know I'm too old to fall for that," I said. "Don't you think a collectible piece of art from Warner Brothers would be a great souvenir?" said Jean. I wrote my letter that night to Bugs Bunny himself, requesting a self-portrait. I put it in the mailbox with the flag up. I probably addressed it to Bugs Bunny, C.O., Warner Brothers Animators, Hollywood, California. I probably couldn't find the zip. A week or so later, as I came home from school, I opened the mailbox and saw a handwritten envelope. The lettering looked stylized, carefully calibrated. I saw Jean on the other side of the fence. I ran. "This has got to be it," I said. "Well, have a look." "See the return address?" she said. "Burbank," I said, "just like Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In." Jean and Paul loved Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. They'd watch it at our house when their parents had something else on. We all used to love watching Artie Johnson fall off the tricycle. I opened the envelope. Jean looked curious. I took out the thick paper and saw a realistic watercolor of a rabbit, reminiscent of the Dürer print on the family's dining room wall. "How cheap," I said. "It's a real rabbit. This isn't Bugs Bunny." I was mystified when Jean turned to hide tears and ran into her house. Be careful what you wish for is the moral. It's that goddamned Confucius, so much harsher than quaint old Aesop, and how distinct his signature.